Cindy Tucker from Bluegrass Community and Technical College in Kentucky.
Marcus Geisler. I'm with Columbus River College in Sacramento, California.
I'm Jason Sabine from El Paso Community College in El Paso, Texas.
Melissa Stang from Lord Fairfax Community College in Virginia.
All right, so we're going to talk about shaping ACM cybersecurity curriculum guidelines, and you will have an opportunity in this session to give your feedback and help shape the next version of the guidelines. So we'll start off with a little bit of an introduction to ACM curriculum guidelines and the ACM CCECC, for those who may not be familiar. Then we'll get into some of the background of CCECC 2I, which is our code name for this project, this set of curriculum guidelines for two-year programs. Then we'll actually get into the current draft. So this is a project that is in progress, and we just released the draft that we're calling Iron Dog. So we'll look at what's actually in there, what's the content. And then we're going to do some group breakouts to look at the content. We have some handouts and get some feedback. So to start out, how many people are familiar with ACM, the professional organization ACM? Most people. Yeah, so ACM produces curriculum guidelines for undergraduate degree programs in the computing disciplines. And the ACM recognized computing disciplines were described in CC 25, which is the Computing Curriculum Overview Report. And in that report, at that time, they described 5 different computing disciplines that they consider to be under the computing umbrella. And they are the first 5 listed here. So computer engineering, computer science, information systems, information technology, and software engineering. Now, things have moved on since then, and the CC 2005 report is currently in the process of being updated, and it should be coming out next year as CC 2020. And so in the meantime, ACM has added 2 new disciplines that they consider kind of under the computing umbrella, and one, very important for us, cybersecurity. So they just came out with CCECC 2017, cybersecurity guidelines for undergraduate degree programs. And then the other one that's also currently under development is data science. And so these are ACM's curriculum guidelines for bachelor's degree programs. So I want to start with kind of that overview, but now we're going to take a look at curriculum guidelines for community college programs at the 2-year level. And so for that, I want to introduce the ACM CCECC. So how many people have heard of the CCECC committee within ACM? Okay, so the CCECC is the Committee for Computing Education in Community Colleges. And actually, the 5 of us that are up here today, we are the committee.
Wow.
Yes, 5 of us. And so the committee's actually been around for a long time, over 40 years. It's been for over 25 years a standing committee of the ACM Education Board. And the global mission of this committee is to serve and support community and technical college educators in all aspects of computing education. And so the main way that we do that is we do that through curriculum and assessment development. And that's what I want to talk about today. But we also do some community building events and try and bring together community college folks, for example, at ACM conferences. If you're familiar with the CCECC conference or the SIGITE conference, these are conferences on computer science education and IT education we try and bring together the community college folks that attend these events and do some different things. We have a mailing list and a variety of other things as well. And you can get more information on our website, which is ccecc.acm.org. So that's the CCECC, and we are the group that sort of spearheads ACM's efforts at developing curriculum guidelines at the community college level. And so I just want to mention, before we dive into our current project, some of our past guidelines that we have put out there that you might be interested in. We have our IT competency model that came out in 2014. And this set of guidelines looks at career-oriented IT programs. So a program where the students takes their 2 years of courses and then they get a job after that. So really focusing on those career-oriented skills. So we had a lot of industry input into this particular set of guidelines. And so typically these would be an AAS type degree. And they have been infused with cybersecurity. So even though, as we all know, cybersecurity is a discipline in its own right, it's also something that's important to be infused throughout other computing disciplines. And so these IT guidelines include that. And then our more recent project, CS Transfer 2017, this is for computer science transfer programs. And so it's based on ACM's CS 2013 guidelines for bachelor's degree programs. And these have also been infused with cybersecurity. And we have a couple of copies of these at our table. We have a table in the main building, which you can stop by and get a brochure on our committee, talk to us if we're there, and we have a couple copies of these as well. But now let's focus in on our current projects. And the main one we'll be talking about today is our cybersecurity guidelines. But so I just want to also mention that we have a current project developing IT transfer guidelines. So whereas our IT competency model for 2014 was more geared towards career-oriented programs, more schools are starting to be interested in IT transfer programs. As we're seeing more bachelor's degrees in IT, start to be offered at different universities, there's more interest in IT transfer, and so we have a project to look at what would be appropriate in an IT transfer program as well. All right, but now let's get into CCECC 2Y. And so we'll take a look at the project scope. And so this is curriculum guidelines, as I mentioned, for associate degree programs, 2-year programs in cybersecurity. And in scope for this project, we're targeting both career and transfer programs, so AAS and AS degrees. How many people here at your school have a cybersecurity program that's an AAS, like a career-oriented? Okay. Anyone have one that's a transfer-oriented?
That's what we're working on.
Okay, so there are a couple.
Yeah, we're trying to work on it.
Yeah, but the majority of programs out there, cybersecurity degrees out there, seem to be the AAS. But both are in scope for this project. And we're starting with ACM Cybersecurity 2017. So I mentioned they came out with those guidelines recently for bachelor's degree programs. So this is an ACM project, and so we're using those as kind of a starting point. But of course, updating them in various ways. And 2 other important influences I want to mention, the CAE knowledge units, so the Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense. Most people are probably familiar with the NSA and the DHS program. So we want to make sure, a lot of schools that have cybersecurity programs maybe are CAE or want to become one. And so we're aligning our guidelines with those foundational and technical core knowledge units. And then also, of course, the Nice Cybersecurity Workforce Framework that gets used a lot. We're going to map the guidelines to that as well. And you'll actually see some of that today. Okay, so I want to say just a few words about CCECC 2017. So again, this is ACM's guidelines for bachelor's degree programs in cybersecurity, since this was kind of a starting point for our CCECC 2Y project. And I put up here, taken directly from the document, their vision. And so I want to read this because this will help us understand what's in CCECC 2017. It says, the CCECC 2017 curricular volume will be the leading resource of comprehensive cybersecurity curricular content for global academic institutions seeking to develop a broad range of cybersecurity offerings at the post-secondary level. And so if you kind of parse that out, you can see they're really tackling a lot in this. They want to be comprehensive cybersecurity curricular content, global academic institutions, broad range of cybersecurity offerings. So they really put into CCECC 2017, everything that anyone might want in a cybersecurity program at that level. And so that's just important to keep in mind, if you take a look at these guidelines. And as far as the organization goes, they used a more traditional approach in terms of organizing curricular content, where they have knowledge areas. Within each knowledge area, they have knowledge units. Within each knowledge unit, they have topics. So very much focusing on the knowledge, which is really a little bit of an older model, and ACM's trying to shift away to focus more on competencies and learning outcomes. So it's not just knowledge in students' heads, but what can they show that they can actually do? What skills do they actually have? But this volume did use the older model. And then there's also 2 important concepts, the cross-cutting concepts and the disciplinary lenses. And this picture actually really depicts that the best. So this is, again, taken from that CCECC 2017 document, and this picture kind of shows their model. So they have this body of knowledge inside the hexagon, and they have the 8 knowledge areas that are listed there within. They kind of divvied up cybersecurity into these 8 knowledge areas, but then there's also cross-cutting concepts, because there's certain things that don't fall cleanly into just one knowledge area. And so the cross-cutting concepts are things like confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the triad we're familiar with, risk, adversarial thinking, and systems thinking. And so that's kind of the body of knowledge inside that hexagon. But then they also have this concept of the disciplinary lens. And that is the idea that you could be looking at all of this cybersecurity content through a specific lens. And that lens might be, your personal background, it might be the background of the program that you come from. And this kind of reflects the fact that cybersecurity as a newer discipline among the computing disciplines tends to have, at least as an academic discipline, emerged out of some other discipline, whether it emerged out of a computer science department, an IT program, or whatnot. And so these different sort of flavors of cybersecurity programs that you see, could be colored by these disciplinary lenses. And so that's kind of the model for CCECC 2017. Okay, so now I want to get into the CCECC 2Y task group. And this is the group that we put together, so being led by the members of the CCECC, but with some other people providing some excellent expertise in our group. You can see we have pretty good representation across the country. We have good representation of specialty areas as well in cybersecurity on this group. So great group there. And we also have some advisors to this project, and so we want to get not just the task group community college educators, but other perspectives. So you can see we have some four-year schools on here, we have industry, we have government, and some people also that were on the CCECC 2017 project are also on our advisor group here. So as far as the timeline, this project got started in April of 2018. We had our first task group meeting. We published our first draft of the guidelines, which we called Straw Dog, in February. And we got some great feedback on that. We incorporated that feedback. And now we have just recently released Iron Dog. And Iron Dog will be open for public review and comment, as was Straw Dog. And comments will be due August 15th. And we'll give you info on how to do that. Basically, you can just go to our website and get a copy of the full draft of Iron Dog, and then there's a link for a survey that you can click to enter whatever your feedback is. But we'll have more of that information later as well. We're very interested in community feedback, trying to disseminate this as much as possible to make these guidelines as high quality as possible. And so once we close those comments, we'll be incorporating that feedback as well, and hopefully getting a final version by the end of the year, or maybe early next year. Okay, so that was kind of the process, the scope, the timeline, but now let's actually look at what's in these curriculum guidelines, or at least in the Iron Dog draft. So these are the 8 knowledge areas that were for CCECC 2017. We're maintaining these 8 knowledge areas. So you'll see things organized according to these 8 knowledge areas. We have data, software, component, connection, system, human, organizational, and societal security. And then as far as the structure goes, and I want to mention a little bit of our process here as well. So on the left, you see the CCECC 2017 structure. And as we saw, that was kind of the traditional picture of these knowledge areas. And within each of the 8 knowledge areas that we saw on the prior slide, they have, first of all, they have a section called Essentials that represents just what's essential to that knowledge area, what's essential to data security or component security or whatnot. And then they have a larger list of knowledge units, so some number of knowledge units within each knowledge area that kind of dig down deeper, and then within each knowledge unit a list of topics. So the finest grained level is the topics. So what we actually did as a CCECC 2Y task group, as kind of our first pass when we were looking at CCECC 2017, we started at the topic level. And so we as a task group, this 10-person task group, community college educators, went through every topic in CCECC 2017, and as a group we categorized it as one of either all, some, or none. And all meant that it seemed like a topic that was appropriate for any and every cybersecurity program at the 2-year level. And then some meant we felt it was appropriate for some 2-year cybersecurity programs, but not all. So it might be a topic you'd find in some, but if, not something that you would find in every. And that, of course, reflects that we have diversity in our 2-year programs in cybersecurity. And then none meant it seemed like something you wouldn't find in a 2-year program. And so then with that initial mapping, what we did is we took the topics that had been designated as all, and that formed what we are calling our essential, the essential portion of our curricular content. And then we took the ones that had been marked as some, and that formed the supplemental portion of our curricular content. And then, of course, we didn't include things that were marked as none. And so we kind of did that at the topic level, but as you'll see, we ended up transitioning to more of a learning outcome competency-based model than actual topics. But that was to start from CCECC 2017 and to give us kind of a first pass. And this is how it shook out, just in terms of the number of topics. So there were a lot of topics, obviously, throughout the entire document, and this was how the distribution came out for the all, some, and none. And so again, remember that CCECC 2017 has a lot in it. And so CCECC 2I, our draft guidelines also has a lot in it. And that's kind of reflected here. Okay, but now I mentioned that we wanted to move away from topics. We wanted to look at, what competencies can students actually demonstrate that are going to help them get a job. And so we're using the definition of competency here. It integrates knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So it's not, knowledge is a piece of it. The student has to have some knowledge, but they need to be able to apply that knowledge to accomplish a task, to make a judgment or whatever it may be. So we have the skills. And then dispositions, I put a note up there since that might be a component that's not as familiar to people. And this is according to the paper reference here. Dispositions are attitudinal, behavioral, and socio-emotional qualities of how disposed people are to apply knowledge and skills to solve problems. And so this is something that it's not a personality trait that can't be changed. A disposition is something that can be practiced, can be taught, and people can get better at. And so it just represents that you have the knowledge and the skills, and then you need to actually apply them. Yeah.
Usually it's knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs you see so frequently.
Right.
Why did you choose against that?
Well, what's the difference between a skill and an ability? And this disposition this actually came from another ACM project, IT 2017, and we did some research on that project in the educational literature and found that this is kind of a standard definition of a competency in the educational literature, not necessarily applied to computing. And so this paper actually describes it really well, modeling competencies for computing education beyond 2020, a research-based approach to defining competencies in the computing disciplines. So you can definitely check that out. Does anyone have anything else to add on that?
It has been strictly influenced by with another project, we see CC 2020. They have in consideration that thing, and they have injections from the point of view from the workforce as well.
Yeah. So that's competencies, and so again, we're focusing on student achievement. We're avoiding the traditional body of knowledge that only focuses on topics, and in the context of these guidelines, the main difference between a competency and a learning outcome, as you'll see when we get to the structure, we have the competencies are more high level. So each of those 8 knowledge areas, we have 3 to 5 competencies representing kind of high level tasks or high level competencies that students should have for that particular knowledge area. And with the learning outcomes, we get much more fine-grained. So we have learning outcomes at a more detailed level. And we utilize Bloom's revised taxonomy. How many people are familiar with Bloom's? Yeah, so I know we use it a lot in the community and technical colleges. So this is Bloom's. We have our 6 levels of thinking in the cognitive domain. At the lowest level, remembering, you can memorize and spit something back out, all the way up to creating. And keep in mind that the higher levels subsume the lower levels. So if a student can analyze something, it's kind of assumed they'll need to be able to remember, understand, and apply if they're achieving that higher level. And so the competencies and learning outcomes that are part of the guidance that you'll see utilize these, utilize Bloom's and utilize the verbs that tend to be associated with each of those different levels of cognition. So that represents kind of the depth that you would expect from a given outcome. Okay, and so let's just take a look then at the curricular framework structure. So I mentioned that we kind of have divvied things into essential and supplemental. So that kind of represents, like, if you were building a program, you could look at the essential, and then depending on your emphasis you wanted, you could look at supplemental. So you could think of it that way. And then within each of those, we have the 8 knowledge areas, and within each of the 8 knowledge areas, we have, as I mentioned, 3 to 5 competencies, so high-level competencies. But then we also have the knowledge units that came from CCECC 2017, so that each knowledge area is further divided into knowledge units. And then within the knowledge units, we have the learning outcomes. So where CCECC 2017 had topics, we have learning outcomes instead. But then also I want to mention, as you see at the top, we have cross-cutting competencies. So those cross-cutting concepts, that was the CIA, risk, system thinking, adversarial thinking. We have cross-cutting competencies that reflect those. And so that is the structure of the framework. And I think at this point, I'm going to pass it to Cindy.
So what we have next are just some samples that you can see. You'll in a few minutes, we'll give a handout and you'll actually see the long list of details that we have. But for example, the first one there is an example of competency using Bloom's taxonomy. Over to the right, you'll see that it's from the confidentiality, integrity, availability topic, I guess you could say. And in the grayed out area are the Bloom's levels. So in the document, along with each of the competencies and or learning outcomes that we have, then you're going to see the Bloom's level that is associated with that. There's an example, the second example there is one from the adversarial thinking, and then the last one from the systems thinking. So just a sampling for just a second for you to see the type of detail that you're going to see in the document. This is an example of looking at one of the knowledge areas, software security, again at the competency level, the higher level there, and seeing the Bloom's level and examples of what type of competencies we think are appropriate in software security, for example. Again, in the document you're going to see the competencies for essentials and supplemental for each of the competencies and learning outcomes. So just a few examples for you to see at this point. The document itself, in addition to having all of the competencies and learning outcome, is I guess laid out in this manner. There's going to be an overview. There's an important, I think, a section there on how to use these guidelines. Are you going to use them to take an existing program perhaps and map to this in order to give some credibility to your program, to go to your advisory board, maybe if you want to do changes to your program? Are you wanting to develop a brand new program? This is a guideline you can use to do that as well. The little section there on how to use the guideline I think is very important. We have a section on how, what the 2-year or the community college environment is like. We all know this, but there'll be other people reading this document that they need to be aware of that as well. Diversity within the computing profession, ethical or ethics and professionalism within particularly cybersecurity now. I want you to think for just a second. We're going to come back to this topic in a minute on what the math requirements should be for the cybersecurity discipline. The cybersecurity discipline itself, and then the bulk of the document is, of course, our framework, the essential section with your cross-cutting competencies, those knowledge areas divided into units with the competencies and learning outcomes. This supplemental section as well. Again, that would be some cybersecurity programs cover that, but perhaps not all. Depends on which flavor you have at your school. References, and then an appendix with the competencies and or others that we may find necessary as we go forward. So this is where you all get to see details and you get to help us a little bit. Iron Dog is our second draft, as Kara said earlier, and it's open for comment until August the 15th. And we want to use this time for you all to give you some more information about Iron Dog, to look at it and provide us even some feedback verbally today. We're going to break up into some small groups of about 4 or 5 people in a group, and then we're going to let you look through this. And these are the things that we're kind of wanting you to think about today. I want you to look at the specific competencies that we have developed. They're new from Straw Dog. We did not have them. We had the learning outcomes, but not the competencies included at that point in time. So we would love feedback on the competencies for those 8 knowledge areas that we have and for the cross-cutting concepts. We want to know if the terminology that we're using, essential versus supplemental? Is it clear? Essential means any cybersecurity program should cover these learning outcomes or competencies. Supplemental means some will. So if you have one that's more information assurance or software focused, maybe there are some supplemental learning outcomes that are more appropriate for that. If you're more IT related, there would be other ones, etc. What you think might make these guidelines more useful? We want the document to be useful to community colleges. We want it to make sure that you can look at it in order to review your program or create a new program or enhance your program in some way. This current draft does not have rubrics for each of the learning outcomes. We have done that in other curricular guidelines like the IT 2014 guideline we have. So for every learning outcome, we developed a rubric that would help explain the learning outcome a little bit more, but more help you assess the students on whether they've met that learning outcome. So we would like to know some feedback from you all, whether you think that would be useful for you all to have rubrics for the learning outcomes or the competencies that we have in the document. And then any other input that as you're looking through this or anything that just pops out to you that you want to share with us so that we can improve this document for the final version that we hope to have out by December, January kind of time frame.
Sorry, I had a quick question. I didn't want to misunderstand. At the beginning, I thought I heard you say that it also can be used for when you're trying to align the transfers to the UCCSUs in each school. If so, is there anywhere inside the document dual enrollment included?
Dual enrollment with the, are you
With the
talking
high
about for
schools.
the four-year institutional
Right,
high schools,
right. So, well, when you have your dual enrollment with the CCs, and then you're looking to have those students transfer on to, the four-year universities, is it in there so they can consider that too? And looking at, if they're going to be looking at this, is to seeing what you're doing to make sure that's acceptable as far as the dual transfer students.
We do not have any section in there right now associated with that, but keep in mind this came from 2017.
Right.
And,
That's what I'm saying with the new document, if it
Right.
was, because that's a lot of the issues we're having right now.
Right,
Well,
The
and I'll just
transfer.
add that one of the things we're going to be looking at doing when we publish these guidelines is collecting program examples. So you could take your program and show how your program aligns with these guidelines. And those program examples, and we've done this for our past guidelines, you can find them on our website, for example, CCECC transfer and the IT guidelines, show these curriculum guidelines look like in practice. Which competencies are taught in which courses, what courses does the program offer, and you can actually see an example like that. And actually having one for a dual credit program like you described might be a great thing. So you might even consider submitting for your program when we solicit the program examples.
Also, just to follow up on that, for example, the computer science transfer mappings that we did. I know my school did one because we transferred to our local university and it talked about those courses and how that happened. So we would anticipate doing the very same thing with this document, just like Kara said. So currently there isn't anything in the document itself, but we will be having these exemplars that we will ask people to contribute and add to. Because it's good. And those are very useful because this is a list of learning outcomes and competencies, and every school teaches their courses a little bit different, and what's in each course is a little bit different. So having these exemplars will help you in the future know, okay, now I have a course that's kind of like this, how are other schools doing this? Especially if you're building a brand new cybersecurity program. How have they structured and divided these learning outcomes into courses, and would this fit my needs here, or are mine a little bit different? So those exemplars really help. And we accept those, anytime that schools want to do that, even for our existing guidelines that we have. Any other questions before we break out?
So each one of us committee members is going to be as part of a group, so we're hoping to maybe have 4 or 5 groups to break out into. And if I may, you guys look like one group. You can just turn towards one another, and then we'll have some copies of that Cindy is going to be distributing. And maybe you all up front right here, the front 5 can turn towards each other. I see the back. I'm going to join that California heavy group back there, so I'll go back there. And maybe you all as well. And then we'll send somebody.